I am pleased to welcome Neil Woods, who will be talking about his career, his previous career in policing, and how he's completely changed track and what he's doing now, and Dr. Andy Aresti, who will be talking about his experiences, prison to PhD and back. So it's almost two sides of the same coin. So I think this is one of the panels I've been most looking forward to hearing. A bit of noise over there. So Andy, are you ready to start? Yeah? Okay.
Hi everyone. After 2 years, so I'm a criminologist, so after 2 years of teaching people online and not having this real life sort of face-to-face interaction, it's good to be back, as it were. I've missed it quite a lot. So Shannon invited me to talk about two of my favourite things, drugs and prison, right? Actually, my favourite thing is talking about me, which I'm going to do, so don't you worry. So I'll just give you a bit of context. I'm going to talk a bit about my journey from prison to PhD and back to prison again, and that's open to interpretation. And I'm going to talk about some of the projects we've developed within prisons or within the prison estate, and that we presently run. Okay, so I live in Battersea. Does anyone know where Battersea is? Hey, someone knows it. It's in southwest London, right? So I live in Battersea. I'm walking over the bridge, Chelsea Bridge, Chelsea and Victoria, just over the water from me, this little stream called the River Thames. So I'm just got over the bridge. Well, I'm walking over the bridge, going to Victoria to the tube. On my right, I see this iconic building. Not the pig flying. That's not there anymore. Anyone recognise that pig? What's that album from? Pink Floyd. What was the album called? Animals, there you go. We're old school over here, right? I'm looking at you lot thinking, Jesus Christ, I'm going to be talking about things that you might have not even been born when I was having these experiences. So I'm walking over the bridge, over Chelsea Bridge, looking at Battersea Power Station, and I'm sort of thinking, back in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, Pink Floyd were one of the first psychedelic groups, right? Rock groups, right? And I'm thinking how things have changed, because Battersea obviously doesn't look like that anymore. This is what Battersea looks like. Obviously, I was walking over the bridge in the morning. This picture was taken at night. But Battersea's changed a lot, right? And it made me think about the shifting sort of the way drugs consumption and the sort of drugs that we're using these days have changed from back in the day. I'm not that old, so I was around in the 70s, actually, but anyway. So back in the sort of late 60s, 70s, more psychedelics, this, that, and the other, and how it shifted to cocaine and how people have changed in the way that they think, their thought processes. And also, when I say cocaine, what do people think about? If you think about society and cocaine and what sort of issues come to mind? Bankers or... No, what rhymes with bankers? Oh, yeah, cartels, yeah. Bankers or... Are we allowed to swear? No. I don't even know whether I should admit to taking drugs in here because, I've got a professional sort of reputation to... Anyway, so it just made... What I thought about then was about how things have shifted. And when you think about cocaine, you think about power, you think about control, you think about things like that. Back in the days when psychedelics were quite big, in my experience at least, everyone was chilled out in that. Now it's all about power and control. And the changing conception of Battersea, where it's gone from a working class area back in the 1970s to now where to buy a one bedroom flat around there, it's probably about £1 million or something, right? Obviously, I sold a lot of drugs to get my flat back in the day. So, no, it's a long story. Anyway, so... I was thinking about that. So I'm thinking about this talk and what I'm doing and this, that, and the other. And I've got to Victoria. I'm walking down the tube steps. I get a phone call. I'm in the foyer there, right? And I'm talking on the phone. My friend, she's in Italy on the beach. Nice sun and telling me how great it is. And I'm in the pissing rain in London. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm looking at this. Here in London, you're free to love whoever you love and be whoever you truly are. And I'm thinking, see the top one? I love drugs. Then I'm thinking, actually, can I really say that here? Because professional and this, that, and other. I used to love drugs, right? And then I'm thinking, why am I here, actually? So this is all going on in my head, right? I'm letting you into my head. I'm thinking, why has Shannon invited me? What do I know about drugs except for taking them, right? And going to prison for selling them. What do I know? Okay, I'm no expert. And you've got some people that know about drugs, right? Scientifically and this, that, and other. Like yourself, obviously. And I'm thinking, shit, what am I going to talk about? What am I doing here? Well, then I thought, okay, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about drugs. That's what I'm going to talk about. So, for me, drugs started quite early in my life. We started off with, okay, when I was a kid, right, in the sort of, or teenager in the 80s, right, like 13, 14, we used to sniff Tipp-Ex thinner. Has anyone done that? Has anyone done that? And listen, drugs weren't as accessible as they are nowadays. So we started on the Tipp-Ex thinner, then we went behind the bike sheds with the weed, and then we went from weed to speed. I'm going to rap now, weed to speed, and you're a hard audience. I should sell you some drugs, right? So, weed to speed, and then obviously in my teenage years or late teenage years, the rave scene. Listen, as they say, you know when you watch all those films about Vietnam and all the veterans and they say, you had to be there, man. You wasn't there, man. You had to be there, right? So for those of you that know that scene, right? So obviously went from weed and speed, obviously still taking weed and that, but went into sort of, what did I go into? You tell me. The rave scene. Ease and coke for me, right? Yeah, I know. Quite a nice combination, actually. So I'm on the ease and the coke, and in parallel, right, I'm involved in crime as well, okay? But actually, I'm a roofer, and I had a roofing company So point I'm trying to make is that yeah, I took drugs. Yeah, I was involved in crime, but actually I had a legitimate roofing company as well. So, I mean, not getting too theoretical here, but there's this criminologist called Matza, and he talks about drift theory, how people drift into crime and out of crime, especially when they're young, how people drift into drugs and out of drugs when they're young and when they're adults as well, right? And it got me thinking that actually, if you don't take drugs or you've never taken drugs or you're not open-minded in your sort of ideas about drugs, most people think if you take drugs, you're a drug addict, right? And for me, that's quite problematic, okay? So anyway, here I am, okay, in the drug scene and that, roofing, involved in crime, but not separate and that. And then I started selling cocaine, okay, which is my favourite drug. Well, actually ecstasy as well, but anyway, you're putting these recordings up, right? To my boss at the university I don't take drugs anymore. So, you're thinking now, does he take drugs? Doesn't he take drugs? Anyway, so this is a bit about my story before I get on to what we're actually doing, because I'm aware of time, right? Listen, I haven't been on stage for like 2 years. Are you serious? So anyway, here we are, right? So I'm in King's Cross. I've just dropped off an ounce of cocaine in Islington. These are London areas, right? Central London. I'm at my mate's in King's Cross, just had a spliff and that. Me and my mate get in the car to go back to my flat in Old Street, pulled out the corner, one-way street, middle of King's Cross. There's about 40 police there. Did you say you were ex-police? Excellent. You didn't arrest me, did you? Not in the London area, just so I know. I love the police anyway, it's not a problem. But anyway, so there I am, right? It's about 1 a.m. in the morning. I've got a few £1,000s in my pocket. I've got an ounce of coke hidden in the car. Can't reverse, there's a car behind me. Basically, I'm shafted, okay? Cut a long story short, I was obviously, they weren't my drugs. I was like, who put that coke in my car? Jesus Christ. Anyway, went on trial, went not guilty, got found guilty, went to prison for selling drugs, okay? While I was waiting for my court trial to come, I went into prison on remand, came out, and I was quite messed up anyway. Not particularly because I was taking a lot of drugs, just because it was a shit time in my life just generally. And I think drugs just helped with that. So I wouldn't have to blame it on drugs at all, right? So anyway, started seeing a therapist. Oh no, a therapist, mental health issues. Oh. Yeah, I was a bit crazy actually. In those days, people used to say to me, Andy, you're crazy. And I used to think, yeah. You know, that sort of masculine sort of identity, a bit of a nutter. And that now I think, oh my God, you know, mental health issues. Woo-hoo. So anyway, saw a therapist and that, and I was looking at quite a long sentence, but luckily I didn't get as long as I was expecting. And the therapist goes, well, listen, if you go to prison, because I was like, oh, my life's over. I was like mid-20s, right? My life's over. What am I going to do? I might get 8 or 9 years or whatever in prison. My life's over. And he's like, oh, well, why don't you do something constructive like study? Study. I hated school. Only reason I went to school was to misbehave, be deviant, and chase the girls, right? That's what these adolescent boys do. So anyway, I thought study. So I started studying psychology, doing an access course. Then went to prison, continued the access course on a long-distance basis, which was cool. Then I got out of prison around 1998, in August 98, and a month later, I'm walking through the gates of a university in London. And I remember walking through the gates and I'm thinking, looking at the sun, it was a nice sunny day, blue sky, and I was thinking, what the fuck am I doing here? Prison was fine for me. I come from that environment. You know, I've grown up with people like that. And, you know, if you can look after yourself in prison, you're sort of all right, right? So I'm coming out, and obviously I haven't got time to talk about prisons and drugs in prisons and that, but if someone wants to bring it up, I'll tell you about prison and drugs and this, that, and the other. Anyway, so came out, did a degree in psychology, got a first-class degree in psychology, went on to do a master's in cognitive neuropsychology at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience in part of UCL in central London. And that's when it hit me. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist or a forensic psychologist. Who better to be a forensic psychologist than someone that has been in prison, someone that's been engaged in crime, right? Hello? Sorry, you can't be a clinical or a forensic psychologist because you've got convictions for drugs and a few non-violent related. Some of them are actually fighting with police, so I'm sorry to everyone. I'm just messing, right? So I'm thinking, shit, all this work that I've done, right, to change my life around from being involved in a criminal lifestyle, and here I am, right? And it made me think about, and it makes me think about the stigma with drugs, right? Because you think about it, and we can talk about prison. Listen, there's a lot more drugs. You can easily score in prison in comparison to out here, much more. There's a lot more, it's more localized, the violence, the drugs and everything, right? People getting cut up in turf wars about the drugs, people getting into debt because of the drugs, right? They're addicted, they're getting into debt, they're getting slashed, right? Or they're having to go on 5 minutes. Oh my God, really? Okay, right? So anyway, what I wanted to say, the most important point is when you come out and you've got the stigma for drug-related sort of offences, and it made me think, you know, are we free to be who we are? That's why I had that sign up there. I was thinking about you earlier when I came down Victoria Station. You're free to be, well, actually it said you're free to love whoever you love. Well, I love drugs, but actually I can't sing that from the rooftops, right? So anyway, cut long story short, I went on to do a PhD. And I'm aware we've only got 5 minutes, right? So I can talk about this if you've got any questions about the lows of drugs. But what I'm particularly interested in telling you about is insider perspective and how important it is to our knowledge. So as I was doing my PhD, I learned about this group in America, a network of academics that basically had done a lot of time in prison and then came out and became academics. And what this convict criminology do, and I'm part of convict criminology, right, is we privilege the prisoner's voice. Who better to tell us about prisons, about drugs and that, than people that have had that lived experience of drugs and prisons and that? It's all right listening to all these, especially Ministry of Justice when it comes to crime and stuff like that, and their conceptualizations and perceptions of people like me, of prisoners and what prisons are like. Prisons are shit. I mean, you know, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I mean, I've stayed in some shit hotels, but prisons are the worst, let me tell you. So, anyway, how does this link to drugs? Well, one thing, what happened was that, who knows what happened in the 1970s? Richard Nixon. I knew you lot were too young for me. Richard Nixon, right? The war on drugs. You notice every few decades we have a war on something. War on drugs, war on terror, war on organised crime back in the mafia days in the States and that. War on drugs had significant impact on prison population. In fact, sentences got longer, sentences got tougher, basically, okay? Tougher sentencing for prisoners. And what we found was more and more people were going into prison, and that was the same for us over here, because the Brits are like lambs, right? We follow the American in terms of policies. Americans, like, especially in terms of criminal justice policy. Okay, I know your eyes are staring at me. It's like being in prison. Can't do this, can't do that. Okay. Go to bed, lights off. Anyway, so I'm joking, right? So the war on drugs had a significant impact on our prison population as well as the American prison population. The only one good thing that came out of that, more people going into prison, more people were getting bored because they were thinking, right, I've got 10, 15 years in prison. There's only so much you can do, or there's only so... You get bored of walking about giving it, yeah, I'm a prisoner, no. And then you think, I need something else, a bit of stimulation. So what we found was a lot more people started studying and going into higher education, okay? And that's what we do now, right? This is what we're doing now. So we brought convict criminology over here, and we've got a number of partnerships, me and with other prisons around the country, okay? And abroad. So very quickly, because I'm aware of Shanna looking at me. So one of our projects is at HMP Pentonville, where I served the first year of my sentence, basically, and I got married in that prison. We're here. No, I did. To a woman, not to a guy. I'm just saying, right? So that's us outside HMP Pentonville. It's a partnership where we take 10 of our students in and they study alongside prisoners for 12 weeks. It's an accredited module, okay? Is this falling off? No. Oh, it's me. Okay, so you can see me somewhere there. I'm the one with loads of hair. See me there? No, the bald one, obviously. And my colleague, Sasha. This was me after I came out of prison on the right. Yeah? We've got a project at HMP Grendon, which is the only therapeutic prison in the country. Again, what we're doing here is we're taking students in and they're studying with our other students, inside learners, the prisoners. And the whole point of these projects is because we understand the transformational potential of higher education, okay? To go from a criminal life, if you're going to change your life around, there's a few things that are going to help you change your life around. A meaningful relationship, a job, all the usual stuff, right? But one of the most powerful, apart from those sort of things, is higher education. So we're doing this at Grendon, and we're also doing one at HMP Coldingley as well. Okay, so we run 3 prison projects. We've just started one at Bronzefield as a pilot, which is a women's prison, so we haven't left the women out. Okay, and we are doing some of this stuff. You'll like this. You might give me an extra 30 seconds. A pack.
A what?
A pack. We've been to Brazil when we started the project over in Brazil, right? And then we've also been to... Yeah.
So Cuda is a prison in Brazil which trialled using ayahuasca with the prisoners there. It was a very interesting period, but it was eventually stopped because of public opposition.
Here you go.
The luck to visit there, haven't you?
Yeah.
Really
We've been there, we've been Sao Paulo, we've been to Buenos Aires as well, Argentina. So we're trying to internationalise these projects and take them abroad because generally you can't separate crime from drugs. You go into any prison, most people in there, or a lot of people in there are in for drug-related crimes and that. And I'm aware of time, so I will come off, but just some conclusions if you want to have a look at those and maybe I can pick up on some of that later.
Yeah,
Cheers.
hopefully during the questions we can pick up on some of these points. So thank you very much for that, Andy.
Thank you. Okay.
Very interesting. Okay, and now Neil Woods.
I'm an introvert, and I actually don't like the attention at all, believe it or not, which might surprise some people who know how many public speaking things I do, how much media I do. I honestly, I don't enjoy it particularly. But the reason I do it is because I'm an activist, and because I do have some stories that people find useful to help people change people's minds. That's why I do it. That's why I'm here. Now, I do lots of different audiences. The most recent audiences I've done have been a Women's Institute group, and they're my favourite audience because you're going to get a room full of people who have no idea about drug policy, and most of them would vote against change until you've spoken to them. So from my point of view, they are the absolute ultimate audience. They're like gold for me. And thankfully, I've got onto one of the Women's Institute circuits, so I quite often speak to sort of old, middle-aged women who prefer normally to talk about knitting and crafts. And it's great. But when I come to an audience like this, and I think I'm not going to give you the same talk that I say to those Women's Institute groups, because hands up who thinks we should reform drug policy. Yeah, you see, you're all converted already, aren't you? So I have to sort of adapt what I say to different groups. I mean, The talk I gave before the Women's Institute group was to a group of Nigerian army officers, some online training for them. And I'm not going to say the same things to you that I said to them either. But I was coming here today thinking, how exactly am I going to adapt the things I say to a crowd like you, who are all really intelligent, informed people? Well, and I sort of decided what I was going to say when I was chatting to some people who I know here just before I came in. And the thing is, there's some really interesting things happening on social media. Really, really interesting. And you'll all know this because you'll have all joined in at some point. At the moment, the police are getting much more sophisticated in what they do on social media. And they're much more posting these pictures of these cannabis seizures, these big grows that they've seized, and it's always the biggest one. It's always biggest since the last one. And the interesting thing that's happening on social media universally is that suddenly there's a mass internet crowd swamping it, saying, oh, well done, officers. Hadn't you be better chasing some paedophiles? Well done for wasting all your money doing it. And, all the kind of comments that I bet you've all done it at some point. But this is really, really interesting because the Pelian principles which govern what police do should still be adhered to, and police leaders will tell their troops that they still do. But Peel's principle number 7 is that the public are the police, and the police are the public. The police are merely the people who wear the uniform. Now, that worked until we had drug prohibition, because drug prohibition put a big gulf between the police and the public. But there's evidence of that gulf eroding away at the moment. Every time you look at a police post about a cannabis seizure, or they've seized a big block of cocaine that's the size of a hay bale, or whatever it is, people are now commenting on social media. But at the moment, it's just noise. It's just noise. And we have to see ourselves as a movement. We have to. We have to see ourselves as a movement, work together, take leadership from the organizations that are forming messaging, and have some message discipline. Now, I'll try and explain what I mean by that. Basically, whenever I'm at a Women's Institute group or a very small C conservative group where it's a pleasure because I can persuade a whole room full of people, and they're always persuaded, you never get anyone at the end who says, oh, okay. You never get anyone who didn't listen and engage. Generally, people are persuaded. You just have to have the platform. The most common question from a small C conservative audience after you've won them over is, oh, okay, what you've just said makes complete sense. All of those examples you gave, the futility of it, the growth of organised crime that's being caused by the status quo, all of that is completely logical that you just explained to me. No one's explained that to me before. So if it's that logical, why aren't the politicians doing it? And it's a good question. It is a good question. Now, traditionally, I answer it by saying, well, we've got decades and decades of propaganda to overcome, because the politicians, the newspapers have been telling the public that the current policy is justified, that basically people have been told lies for decades. So that's really difficult to get over, isn't it? You have to unpick what people believe, the prejudice people have about people's behaviours. So that's one answer. Another answer, of course, is that politicians will go where the votes are. And so, of course, if we want to win the politicians over, we have to make the social movement grow. Tangibly, that's why I'm here. That's why many of us get involved in this, because we're trying to make the social movement grow. Like any social justice issue in history, change comes from social movements. It doesn't come from political leadership. Politicians generally are weather vanes, not signposts, for the most part. But I've come to believe that the most important answer to that question is why is that the police control the narrative. And they do. But let me explain in some detail. If you were to see drug prohibition as a business, and I don't mean the money involved in the exchange of the product, I mean the idea. If you were to see the idea of prohibition as a business, it would have the most powerful marketing of any business in history. Now, if you consider that a company like Coca-Cola will pay multiple millions of pounds to a film to have 3 seconds of their product in that film, you can realize that in the modern age, just how important imagery is in persuading the public and making the public believe certain things or get them to buy your products. And what the police do is every single time they do a raid, every time they arrest a gang, every time they do a drug seizure, they do a press release. Sometimes if it's a huge event that gets on the news, it's headline news, or it's regional news, or it's a local newspaper, or if it's just on social media. Essentially, police in every single nation on earth, every single nation, everywhere, use the same 3 images. And it's like marketing. The first is the picture of people's doors being smashed in. And in the UK, that's normally a big red battering ram. You know, we've all seen those images. Sometimes the Home Secretary might be skulking around behind them, ready to gloat at people who are arrested. The second image is the rows of mugshots. The gang, all lined up who've been caught. You've seen them, they're behind the newsreader, they're on the front page of the newspapers, and they're normally not white either. The third image, and probably the most important one, is the image of the drug seizure itself. It's the huge cannabis grow, it's the massive blocks of cocaine, it's the Royal Navy have seized a ship, it's the National Crime Agency have seized huge numbers of this, that, or the other, or it's a 2 million ecstasy tablets, whatever it is, it's the same image. It's repeated over and over and over again. But what this marketing does from the police is, to the uninformed, it reminds them there's something to be scared of. And on the other hand, it reassures them that something's being done and that current policy works. And they are told that on a daily basis from these repeated images that the police put out. So the growth of our movement, because our movement is nothing without growth, the growth of our movement is restricted by this constant marketing that the police put out. Now, this is not something the police are doing maliciously to damage society. They're not even collectively aware that they are so powerfully influencing the direction of policy. They're not. You talk to them, that's not what they do. All they're doing is they feel they have a duty to inform the public that they're doing stuff about what they're concerned about. So it's a chicken and the egg situation, isn't it? They're reminding the public they've got to be scared about something, and then the public complain to the police when they don't do it. So the police put out these images. So it's not deliberate. But how do we tackle it? How do we challenge that police narrative? Well, it's happening. Communities are answering back on social media. But the trouble is, the police are taking no notice. The wider public are not taking any notice of that discussion on social media because there's no message discipline. We're not repeating very simple phrases which will make people sit up and take notice that a very substantial and important part of the community is saying no. They're saying, no, that's my friends, that's my neighbors. I know who grew that cannabis. That cannabis was going to be made into oil for medicine. We're not getting the right messages. And just ego shouting on Facebook is not going to make the police sit up and take notice. So in trying to think what we do about challenging the police narratives, at LEAP, we came up with the idea, or a series of ideas, and the first product of that idea was a video I did for Anyone's Child. And in that video, I looked to camera. It's a very nice bit of social media product by Cara Lavin of Anyone's Child. And basically, I explain that these drug seizures don't reduce crime. And in fact, more often than not, wherever the police arrest people, seize drugs, crime goes up. It goes up. Now, that's a very simple and basic truth that would, if the public understood, it would make the social movement grow. So, if you see those social media posts by the police, I'm sure you do, please look up that video on anyone's child because it's a piece of message discipline. And if you repeatedly use that in response to those posts, the police will take notice. Now, thankfully, people are using it. I've gone onto some posts from police, and I've seen the video posted 3 times on one thread, and that's fantastic because repetition works. If that's suddenly appearing 3 times, 4 times, 5 times in every post, those cops are going to watch it. Now, I've been contacted by police all over the country and the world because the video's been translated into Mongolian, Spanish, German, Polish, a few other languages. And so we're getting messages from police all over the world who themselves have been persuaded by this video. Now, that's tangible activism. That's activism that's actually having an impact on the people who are controlling the narrative. So please look that up, please, and please use it. And if anyone else is talented with social media, is good with messaging and can communicate with those brilliant organizations out there who are in this space, then come up with other ideas. But don't just shout, come up with some tangible messages. Mm-hmm. Now, it's important, I mean, as I said at the start, the reason I do this is because I'm an activist, is because I want my experiences to be useful. And I feel a duty to speak because I do have these experiences. You know, normally when I go on a podcast or I speak to the news or wherever, you know, I've got some stories of where I almost got killed and that people find that entertaining. Of course they do. So, you know, please do use the examples of people like myself from the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. And we are a growing organisation around the world. We started in the United States. We're about to launch a series of events across Europe to launch Leap Europe. We're establishing Leap in France. Leap Germany is thriving. You know, we are spreading across the world. And what I would hope you would also do is to take that narrative away with you, or to anyone listening to this as a podcast or recording. Take that narrative away from you that there is a growing movement within the police themselves to change things. And nurturing that movement within the police is key to winning this. It is key to ending the war on drugs. Because when soldiers start putting down their weapons, it's difficult to declare another battle, another front. And it is key to winning this. So please, support us on social media, share what we do. If you have the capacity to invite one of us to speak to an audience, please do so. We do multiple events, especially with anyone's child. It works very well for us to talk alongside a parent who has lost a child to our drug policy. That can be very powerful. And we will come to any community to do that. And we do have a good support structure in order to organise that. We just need a venue and someone locally to help organise it. That's all we need. So I think that's probably going to be 15 minutes. So thank you very much for listening. And I apologise for not doing with the, you know, how I got there sort of talk. But
Neil, that's been fantastic. Thank you. If anyone has any questions for Neil or Andy, can you raise your hand and I'll bring over the microphone?
I think we should have lots of questions for this one. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. That was a brilliant talk, Neil. Thanks very much. And thanks to you as well, Andy. That was really, really diverting. I just was thinking about a line that you said about the kind of the logic and the logic of the argument around drugs policy. And I think you were talking, like, one of the lines that really resonates with me was like the message discipline and repeating the same thing again and again, take back control, whatever, you know, just short words, short sentences. I mean, I think there's 2 questions or 2 parts to my question. First of all, there's a question of access to media in order to kind of to have that message get across. And then the question I think that I want to sort of start with is how much more powerful do you think logic is than emotion in winning an argument? Because I think that emotion is actually a more powerful tool in winning an argument than logic. I think people respond emotionally, as you said, with the anyone's child thing. And that's what I've always tried to do with my own work, is to put that emotion into it. rather than just logic, because, I mean, logic doesn't seem to persuade people, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. There's definitely a truth in what you say in terms of the emotional argument and the logic, but in most things, I am a complete geek, and I am certainly a geek when it comes to messaging and trying to understand what motivates people and change people. And obviously that can be different depending on the demographic and the politics of a potential audience. But there was a fantastic framing study by an organisation called Transforming Justice, I think, in about 2016. It was incredibly interesting. And it was actually mostly about how to persuade the public with the argument about not sending people to prison for minor crimes. You know, because most of the time the public is persuaded that punishment is good. It's the way to deal with things. And actually, it's a combination of the things that tends to win people over. It's neither one nor the other. It's like if you were to approach most tabloid reading audiences and try to appeal to them to change drug policy because there's just been 4,500 deaths, you're not going to win many people over, because people don't care about people with problematic substance use disorders. They don't, unfortunately. So we have to deal with the reality. We have to meet the audience where they are. But what this study showed is that if you can mix an emotional argument with a suggestion that your idea is innovative and will solve a problem, then people will sit up and take notice. And it seemed that the most important thing is to have some element of innovation in your persuasion. Another thing that I think we don't do enough of in the drug policy world, and there's lots of different studies in terms of political engagement, is that we don't emphasize the fact that there is a crisis. And that is missing from the drug, generally from most NGOs, because there is a crisis. There's a crisis of climbing violence. There's a crisis of the corrupting power of organised crime. You know, just 2 months ago, there was a major report launched by the organisation called Global Initiative into the future threat of transnational organised crime. And the conclusion of that paper was that alongside climate change, the growing power of transnational organised crime is the biggest threat to our democracy and our security and our way of life. You know, there are now entire nation states that are now narco states, and we are we feel smugly immune to that in our stable democracies like the UK. But I've come right up against corruption from the drug markets, from the illicit drug markets, and it's only going in one direction. And what I've seen is terrifying. And so we need to find ways of making the public realise just how much of a crisis there is. Not just the drug deaths, yeah, that's a crisis, but also corruption, violence. You know, there's been a war between drug gangs going on in Sheffield for the last 12 months. There's been 37 shootings. Did anyone know that? No? When the same kind of thing was happening in Nottingham in 2004, it was front page news every day. There was calls from the Home Secretary, discussions from the Home Secretary, whether they were going to sack the Chief Constable. So in just about 15 years, that's how immune and numb we've become to that level of violence. Now, that doesn't speak well of our society when we're ignoring that level of crisis, because we've just got used to it and we're not demanding change of our politicians.
Can I just say something, right? Because I was blabbering on, and actually the point that I was supposed to make right at the end was that I agree. Obviously, the point I was going to make was, obviously, I think we need drug reform in terms of the policy, right? But my argument would be here with not just drugs, but with prisons as well, is that in our sort of network, convict criminology, we talk about the prison industrial complex, a bit like the military industrial complex, right? War's a big business. Prisons are a big business, right? If I could just go like that and stop all crime tomorrow, there'd be a lot of people out of work, a lot of people out of jobs, right? Number one. And number two, right, prisons, and, you know, particularly drugs as well, this is related to drugs as well, it's a good way of oppressing people. They don't want to change policy. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we want to change policy, but it's such a big political tool to be able to oppress certain sort of communities and groups in society and that. Why would you give that up? I mean, seriously, so obviously I'm for drug reform policy and that, but I just think there's just much bigger things at play here that unless there's a mass of us that are arguing against it, I don't think we've got, you know... I mean, what I didn't tell you about was the drugs problem in prisons, right? As you probably know. The problem, the violence, the sort of, you know, not only between prisoners and that, but, you know, people that are addicted and the dealers and that, but also people that are bringing it in as well, and the implications for them in terms of the law and stuff like that. One of my PhD students, which I forgot to tell you, we've got 4 PhD students that are former prisoners as well in our network, and one's doing his PhD from prison. One of them, she was a prison officer. She got manipulated by a prisoner. She was really low on money. Her partner had left her. She had 2 kids, and the prisoner said, listen, bring some weed and phones in. She brought it in 6 months later. She's doing 2.5 years for bringing stuff into contraband into prisons.
Yeah,
and
it's
that.
true. If we had a more regulated model, then
And
a lot
that's
of
the
these
point.
problems
We wouldn't
could
have that
be,
just like alcohol, right?
But well, I just want to say, I think that's a really interesting question, though, about, you know, whether we appeal to people's moral perspective or whether we give them lots of data, because I think I can speak on behalf of the scientific community, and when I say that we are very sometimes frustrated by the fact that people don't look at the evidence, because we have reams of it which suggests that this current drugs policy isn't working, and also about the potential therapeutic applications for some of these substances, and routinely it's very, very difficult to change people's minds, even though the evidence is unquestionable. So, yeah.
Just picking up on what you just said there about there being bigger things at play, and you saying sort of that idea that the police are doing their best, that they're just putting out this message because they think this is what the public wants. But what do you make of like all the reports that are being done now, and multiple reports in the past about institutional racism? You know, it's a class war, it's a race war. Like, where does that fit into your framing work, and especially the race stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, racism's in the DNA of drug policy, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
It's its foundational principle and its driving force. Basically, our international drug policy is American domestic racism exported around the world with aggressive foreign policy. That's why we have what we have. But it's not everybody who realises that. You know, your average cop on the street, even though he might have he might not detect his own unconscious bias about who he decides to stop and who he doesn't. He or she is not aware of that history, but it still plays out, and it plays out very clearly because you're 10 times more likely to be stop searched if you're black than if you're white, on average around the country. You're also going to get a bigger prison sentence, and you're also more likely to be charged rather than cautioned. So it's like, I mean, I was never very good at maths, but that's exponential racism at every point in the system. But again, that's a difficult. That's something I talk about, and depending on the audience, if I think that's something that's going to win over an audience, but it's a very difficult topic to persuade people with, and you know, most white audiences, they don't believe it, even despite the data. You know, the data can be there right in front of them. It can be as dramatic and horrific. It's exactly the same thing, which is why as a movement of NGOs of different disciplines, whether it's the scientific discipline, whether it's the solicitors of release, whether it's the academics in Transform, or whether it's the mothers and fathers in anyone's child, we all have to work together. And personally, I believe that the 2 most useful organisations in persuading the wider public is anyone's child and my own organisation. And often what we can do, the best thing that we can do as speakers from LEAP, is to add value to what other people do. So stand alongside a scientist, stand alongside someone from another part of the sphere of the debate.
I think that
I mean, a lot has changed in the past year, hasn't it? I mean, since 2020 and George Floyd, and you know, the public opinion is shifting, and I just wonder if there's
that's a good point.
Obviously
no,
not, but
I mean,
it's a really good
listen,
point.
If you
I just think there's an opportunity for you to maybe partner with race justice organisations because it is such a big race issue and it is a big class issue as well. I'm just just wondering who you're partnering with in your messaging work.
Listen, that's what I was saying, right? It is a class issue, and you go into any prison in this country, and I've been to a lot of prisons, obviously in this country, but abroad as well, Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Norway. I've been to a lot of prisons, right? overrepresentation of ethnic minorities, overrepresentation of the working classes and that. So what? I'm working class. Well, although some people say you're middle class now. No, I'm working class. That's where I come from, right? And you go into prison, they're the people that you're seeing, and this is about oppression. From my view, you've got to look at this on different levels of analysis as a researcher and an academic, right? And at the top, you've got these wider social structures that are oppressing certain types of people. My students, when I take them into the prison, right, they're like, oh, first thing they say is, actually, these people are normal. Really? But we like othering in this country, don't we? You know, the deviant drug taker, the deviant criminal, you know, not like us. You know, we can make ourselves feel better about them. And then the second thing they say is, there's a lot of foreign people in here, or ethnic minorities in here. Oh, really? This is life. This is prison. And there's always that injustice on all those different sort of multi-layered sort of... but you know what the problem is? And everything I want to say, all the intelligent stuff, I'm sort of, well, arguably intelligent, you might disagree, but I didn't say then, I'm saying it now. But production of knowledge, right? You think as researchers, we're researchers, right? Who funds what research and who's in the power to determine what type of things you can say? I'm a critical criminologist, right? And what we're trying to do with this convict criminology thing is bring people like myself that have come from the prison into criminology so we can change the face of the discipline, right? We don't get funded by the Ministry of Justice because they're going to say, that geezer, he's always talking us down, you know? And so it's about who's got the power to produce knowledge, and that fits in with you and the media, right? Because the media gets into the sort of public consciousness.
Okay,
So
well, we need to wrap up this panel.
Again, she's always stopping me.
Sorry.
I wanted at least half an hour to
role,
talk.
though.
No, I'm
As
joking.
a
I'm
panel
joking.
host, that is
Shona.
all I have to do is remind people of time.
I know.
Unfortunately. But yeah, that's, you know, part of what we're attempting to do here is to get that diversity of voice where we've got people coming from the policy background, from the scientific community, from the actual, you know, the lived experience as well. And yes, you're right. I think we need to make a concerted effort to bring in other organisations as well and make sure that those voices are truly representative. But yeah, it's a really, really good question. Okay, so thank you so much for participating in this panel. It was really informative.